Hi, Andy. Good morning.
Hi, Cleona. Good morning.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. I think it will be so helpful to people who are looking to aspire to be somewhat financially independent and also doing FI for good, financial independent for good, using their spare time for life enriching activities like you. So, I guess if you'd like to introduce yourself and then tell us how did you come across fire, that would be helpful.
Yeah, hi, I'm Andy Philpott. Um, I kind of had a background in working as a security guard for a long time, it's more than 20 years, and really not being happy with that. And also having a situation where I was co-owner of a flat with a brother, and that didn't work out too well. I found myself paying all of the bills, and it meant by the end of that time I was kind of heavily in debt. And I think just coming out of it by the time I'd met you, and I just sold a flat, and it felt kind of horrible getting to that point and getting that money as a lump sum and feeling I wanted to do something kind of worthwhile and ethical with it and not just trying to get more money for the sake of it. I really just wanted to pause, and that's when I met you.
And are you happy to say how much money you started with? You don't
Yeah,
have to if you don't want to.
I think the lump sum was about 180k, and I think I bought another pension pot in from elsewhere that was close to about 60k.
Hmm.
So at that point, it's about what 240k potentially to look at investing.
Yeah. So not an insignificant amount of money, fairly significant,
Mm.
but not necessarily a pot that you could change instantly to living off.
Well,
So,
at that point, that wasn't even on my horizon. I'd never heard of fire by then. And I thought, well, if I can let this grow by the time I reach retirement age of 67, maybe the best I can hope for is there'll be enough and I can live off of that because that's how it works. I didn't know otherwise.
mm,
And, kind of hope for the best that I might reach that point, and that's all you can reasonably expect in life.
it's very helpful to have your story and the background. How did you hear about it then?
Um, I was introduced to Vicky Robin, who helped start the FIRE movement in America, which is financially independent, retire early. I'm not sure about the retire early bit, but if you can do it before 67, I think, that's a bonus. It's, having that time to choose what to do with your life, rather than working just to have the money to pay the bills and not thinking too consciously about it. And having read Vicky's book, it really just kind of blew my mind. Like, this is possible. You can put money away and save it and be able to live off this 4% interest, which we can talk about, I think, in more detail. And having gone to a workshop which you kindly ran, which Vicky was there and explaining that and how it kind of brought people's stories alive and how they managed to bring it into their lives. I thought, well, why can't I do this? It can't be that difficult. It might take time, but I can do this. And the more I thought about it, the more it was, yeah, I really want to do this.
Hmm. That's amazing. So you read a book, you attended a workshop, your mind got blown open, you saw
Yeah.
the possibility and the excitement. I can just see the excitement on your face of when you saw the possibility that you could do it. That's amazing. So what was the timeline? When did you first start investing the spot? And then when did you meet Vicky roughly? Was it
I think it was about
2016?
uh, the autumn 2017.
Okay.
And I think at that point, I'd read the book and she'd come over and I'd done the workshop. And I thought, well, this is not something I can really do on my own. It could really help with having a community around. And I spoke to a couple of people at that workshop and we said, oh, we'll get something going ourselves, but it never quite took off.
Ah,
Uh, but there was something around London being such a huge city But something similar was already in place, but it had kind of faded away. So I connected with that group, I think it was via Meetup, and decided to get that going again. And that went for a while and began to go slow. And then I found an even bigger community. There was nearly 1,000 people in London who were into fire. And I thought, this is what I want. You know, this is viable for them. So if they can do it, I can do it.
So do you think that community was helpful, finding other people that had the same vision, the same dream, had some knowledge also to share? Do you think that that's quite helpful to be on the fire journey?
Oh, I think so. It wasn't just their stories the same as mine, because we all had different backgrounds. Some were earning quite a large amount of money, so their point that they wanted to reach, where they could say, well, that's enough and I can live off the interest, was much, much higher than mine. And I think relatively in that community, my kind of figure was quite low. I'm happy to share. I mean, I thought I could live on 20k a year because that was about my salary, and 25 times that, which gives the 4%, would be £500,000, which is, it's a vast sum for me. And I thought I might make that by 67, and that would be enough. And for most people, it was, well, we got our figure. How soon can we make that savings pot? How can we achieve that so we can get our goal? And everyone was doing it in different ways. So quite popular was things like buy to let, using property. And I've done that before unwillingly, and that wasn't for me. But it was helpful to see that other people will leverage things like that, buy properties, fix them up, rent them out. It's a choice. But I've been there and it wasn't my choice.
Because
Well, it was hard work, and leveraging money from bricks and mortar sounds easy, but actually, you don't get money from bricks and mortar. You get money from people who are using that bricks and mortar, and people can be tricky. And it wasn't a comfortable experience for me, so I didn't want to revisit that. It was tempting, but I kind of done that. It wasn't satisfying for me, and without evaluating how other people want to do it. If it works for them, great, but not for me. And I thought I want to put my money into ethical investments and trust that my portfolio will grow in its own way, and that will be sufficient. And green investments are doing so well at the moment, coal and gas and fossil fuels. They've had their time, and they're not attractive anymore. So this portfolio seems set to grow in that way.
I just read a report on the Financial Times this week that ExxonMobil had losses of 20 billion. So yeah, and ethical and green investments are doing very well. Thank you for pointing it out, because I'm, as you know, an independent financial advisor, and often, not anymore, but back in the day, like a few years ago, people would come to me and say, I've heard that it does very badly. I've heard that I'll miss out. And it's not true. It's absolutely not true. And it's also proven during COVID times that green investments are more resilient. You don't lose as much and you gain more. So it's win-win. And also it's good for the planet, good for you, feels good. So how did your portfolio do at the time that you decided to retire, and were you able to get to the $500,000 goal? Where were you on that spectrum?
Well, I think just prior to deciding I was going to retire, I was looking at it and thinking, if it grows and carries on growing at a steady rate, I can kind of work out when it's a good time to say, I can retire then. But the stock market is pretty random, fluctuates all the time, responds to quite random things, and it doesn't work that way. It's the best way there is. It's the most return on investment you're ever going to get, but it can be pretty random, and whatever's in the news can affect it and make it go down as well as up. And I think my savings dropped about 9% at one point, and I thought, well, now's a bad time to think about retiring early, because if it keeps dropping, what am I going to live on? But I waited a bit longer and it picked up, and sure enough, it was outperforming anything else other than the stock market. So I found, yeah, this is part of the cycle. It's a natural cycle. It will have dips, and it's going to continue to grow over time, and trusting that would be enough. So, yeah, I had faith in that the stock market. It is erratic, but it's pretty much the best way to invest out there.
So I know you started with about 800 a month because that was what the Sunday Times article quoted. Um, and I guess let me just check my question.
Actually, that was a bit less than that, because I know the Sun, it was 740 a month. And just to keep things ticking over, I was putting 40 of that back into my pension. But having retired, it was just to keep it alive. So effectively, I was living off £700 a month, which was all of my bills, everything I've worked out, and just a little bit as a leeway, I think 50 or 100 on top. So I paid off my mortgage, so that was quite low. I guess for other people, it could be quite different. But it really does pay to work out exactly what's coming in, what needs to go out, and what latitude you have. It's a good exercise that the FIRE practice can teach you, and Vicky Robbins' book has some really good guides for how to work out your numbers. So it can be confusing, but once you got them, things begin to crystallize.
Things begin to crystallize. I like that. Yes, the book really does point out those 9 exercises are helpful. And although there is quite a bit of resistance to doing them, especially the one where you have to work out all the assets and earnings you ever made in your life. And then you think, oh my God, what do I have to show for it? I've got a lot of stuff. I seem to have spent all my money and I haven't, and there's quite a lot of resistance to it. Like, I haven't done that step. I don't want to look at what I could have had.
I did that. I'm happy to share it. I worked out my lifetime earnings at that point were it's about 537,000.
Wow.
I haven't worked since I was a teenager, which doesn't feel like a lot. And when I had that number, I thought, okay, that's nice to know.
Yeah.
I'm feeling quite annoyed and slightly kind of angry almost, in a way that, well, I'm not that number isn't me. I'm more than that. But it was good to know that, well, that's the truth of what I've earned. It's a matter of record.
Yeah. It's good to know that you looked at it and it feels like in a very sort of, matter of fact way. Yeah, that's what I earned. And although I have some feelings about it, it's just information.
I was very, very emotional doing that work. Because I'm putting my time, my life energy into getting that money, and seeing where it goes and where it went and where it might go, it really can wake you up. It woke me up.
And I have to say, you did attend like pretty much all the workshops that I offered for a bit. You were interested in looking at money. You weren't shying away from it, and it can be very uncomfortable work. So I do commend you on your courage to do that, because sometimes people will book a workshop, pay the money, and not turn up because the resistance is huge. I don't judge it, but I know that that's part of the process, part of the journey.
Yeah. And for me, it was, as much as it was potentially challenging, I wanted to understand it, and I didn't understand really how money worked and how it could flow, and as well as the technical side about investments and what all of that meant. And I thought, well, I need to understand it so I can make choices that make sense to me. And if I just trust someone else, if they don't understand me, then they can make the wrong choices on my behalf. And I really wanted more kind of control over that, and more say over where my money was going and what I was doing with it.
Makes sense. So the first steps that you took on the FIRE journey were making that inventory of your assets, looking at your income and expenses, and then did you have a target in mind of, when I get to this point, I'll retire, or was it more like?
It was. The magic number is 25 times what you earn in 1 year, and for me that was 20,000, so £500,000. So if I could save £500,000, that would generate 4% interest and a minimum, probably a bit more, but as a safety net, 4%. And I could live off that, and that would be sustainable. So next year, I would still have that pot, and 4% interest wouldn't deplete it, so it wouldn't go down. So it could last a lifetime for me, and having family or how I might want to leave a legacy, that would be there to pass on and for me to decide how to use it. And it wouldn't be, well, I have this savings and it's going, and when it's gone for good. And I might still be alive and not be able to pay and sustain myself. But 4% of whatever that figure is that you're able to save as interest, that's enough to make it an income year after year very safely. So having that £500,000 in mind, I thought, yeah, I can do that by the time I retire, age 67. I'm 56 now, so it's nice to retire a decade or so before that. But I didn't want to wait until it was, 67 and hoping it gets to £500,000. So I thought, what can change here? And for me, it was, well, how much do I need? How much is enough? So I worked out my bills and outgoings every month, put a little on top, and that's how I came up with 740. Multiplying that by 12 over the year, I realised I had about 300, I think, in my portfolio by then. And hey, that was more than 25 times, what I would need. So that was enough to say, well, this is my 5 point. I could do this. I didn't quite believe it. And I had to check with you saying, do these numbers work? And you were like, yeah. So that was it. That was a point for me. And I thought, I can do this. I can quit work. I can do the things that I want to do. Now's the time. It's quite challenging to trust that, but it absolutely held up, and it's absolutely sustainable and doable.
And I think the important thing that you did there was how much is enough, because initially you were going with the conditioning of, well, I earn 20K, so I probably need 20K, but then you looked at what you actually need and what you could actually slash. And 740 might be quite difficult for most people, but you had the determination to make it work. And was that more like a 3% drawdown rate? And in the industry, we call that a drawdown rate, the amount of investment growth you decide to take out as income, which I know it's the 4% rule, but I think you went with a lower figure. Was it 3 or 3.5% or something?
Yeah, but drawdown, it was less than 4%. And I think some people have said it could go up to 5% potentially you could take out each year, and it will still renew itself and be sustainable. But rather than, what's the most percentage I would need that I could get, what I could take as a drawdown, I just worked out the money, how much would I need each month.
Yeah.
And I set quite a low threshold for it. And as you say, it's variable for everyone. And it was all my outgoings, plus, near enough about 10% on top for unexpected bills and, entertainment going out. And just allowing for that, but not having it too high, because I didn't want to get too comfortable and retire and do nothing. I thought, well, I want to get back into doing some kind of work, volunteering, and being drawn to do the things with my time that I've got some passion for and that I enjoy. That's the time to do it.
So I'm hearing you say that amount felt abundant to you. It was enough. You built in even buffers for entertainment. It wasn't like just bare survival. You had entertainment, you had a bit of going out. And that sounds really good, because I think a lot of people confuse. They think that if they went financially, it would involve hardship and sacrifice. And yes, it might involve cutting back on some things that didn't actually add joy to your life. But it seems like your life is pretty joyful.
Yeah, I know people who've looked at fire and said it's not for me. I like 2 or 3 holidays a year. I like having a couple of cars. So it's having that kind of consumer-rich lifestyle, and that's a choice. And also people who say, I don't want to quit work because the people I work with, I really like them. I want to be around them. If I didn't have that, I'd miss it. And just having that income coming in doesn't mean you don't have to work again or you can't work again. It just gives you that freedom to say, I can choose where I want to work or whether I want to work or not, what I want to do. I'm not motivated by money. So if it's something that's really nourishing, helping my community, I do things around permaculture and volunteering and a little campaigning that I enjoy, that kind of speak to me, that I've got a passion for.
Mm-hmm.
I can do those and not be bothered about, well, is this going to pay me? Am I just going to get expenses? How can I possibly sustain myself doing this? And having that point in my life where fire is enough to sustain me from that drawdown income, that takes all of those issues away, all of those problems away, and it's very liberating. It's not for everyone, I would say, and you can do that and carry on working in the job you had before, if that's what makes you happy. But for me, it wasn't a happy job I had, so I was just able to give it up.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is that some people are in a very needs-met situation with work and they enjoy it. They have, maybe they want that connection or, and they can't see themselves going for fire. And somehow the fire in your belly came from being dissatisfied in some ways with how your life was and wanting a different kind of life. And you were flexible enough to move the pieces of the puzzle to make it work,
Yeah.
And that's the important thing of fire, I think, is that you can make the design work for you. It's your life, it's your money, and you make money work for you. And most people work for money. And I think the important distinction in fire is that, this fire philosophy is that people make money work for them, and then you're using your time to do fire for good. So one question I have is, what was the hardest part of trying for fire?
It was the idea that it's going to take, maybe a decade, maybe longer, with my original figure.
Mm-hmm.
And then, thinking, how can I get from where I am now with my savings to maybe slowly increase and get to that magic number, whatever that number is. And thinking this is going to take the rest of my working life potentially to do it. But I think it's a good place to start. And for me, it was fairly easy choice to say, well, actually, I can live on less, give up the meaningless work that I was kind of doing just to earn money to pay bills that maybe I didn't need so much, and looking into that. And then say, well, if I can live on less, that number can come down and I can do this much quicker. And there are people who've done this age 30 who, worked from their entry level of their working career and been able to do it very quickly. And others like me, maybe it's, in your 50s, you might get to that point. And I think a common criticism that often comes up is, well, like me, I had a property sale, so I'm very fortunate to have that pot. But you can save something every single month, no matter what your income is. And that can make a difference. It really can. And I think the thing about having like a savings portfolio, it's accumulating. It's interest that accumulates and builds up on itself. So if you can leave it alone and trust that it's going to grow, you're on that journey already potentially towards fire.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah, and there are some technical things that people need to learn, like what you mentioned, the savings rate and things like that. But all of those are moving parts that can be adjusted based on what you think you're willing to do and what your capacity is. Because I imagine for people with, sometimes I hear, yeah, but you don't have kids and things like that. But I know people who have children, and the motivation for them is because they have children and they want to spend time with their kids, they are even more motivated to make the changes in their life, So I think anyone can do it. And yeah.
And yeah, like you say, having children, they're only young ones. So if you're working all the hours that you can to make sure they're taken care of, you might not be there for them, and you're going to miss that time when they're growing up. So if you're able to sort of look at, are you able to get out of that now? Even if it's having a few years out to be able to spend that quality time with them, there's nothing to say you can't go back to what you were doing before when they're growing up, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's a freedom of choice when it suits you.
Hmm.
And since I was doing fire on 740 a month, I've actually shifted that because at the time I was single and it was enough to get away from the difficult issues in my life. So being involved in a property I couldn't sell for a long time and a job that wasn't making me happy, just getting away from those very overbearing, overwhelming experiences. That was my priority. But having done that, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have someone to share life with? And I've now managed to do that and realizing I might need a bit more money for two rather than for one. So
Yeah.
I've shifted my drawdown again, and it's now, I think it's about 900 a month, which is still sustainable. It's still sustainable as a drawdown, and it's enough to make us happy. In fact, all we need now is for lockdown to lift so we can enjoy it some more.
And you do other little bits here and there to earn income, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I work as a social media manager for someone in the NVC community, sharing very nourishing work about how we connect, about trauma and neuroscience. So that gives me an income, and it's work I really enjoy, and I can do that from home at any time.
Mhm.
So that's the income I have coming in. I also do some focusing work. I'm a focusing practitioner. Really enjoy helping people with embodied awareness, and that's a business I'm hoping to get started this year. And there's other things I like doing that are really supportive of me and my community, which don't pay but are really nourishing. And that's being a buddy volunteer at the Forest Farm Peace Garden. And it's helping people in nature who have been experiencing maybe low level stress or anxiety or depression. And just being with them in nature just really helps to soothe them. They get referred by their GP as it's a really good cure, just being out with plants and fresh air. I'm sure you know it's a really nourishing thing to do to be able to grow and spend time in the garden. So I like doing that. There's a local nature reserve I help out at. I do a London Perma Blitz, which is you help people design their garden and build it. And after doing 3 or 4 of those, I come around and do your garden design for free. And lovely little projects like that I now have the time for, and I really find them so connective, nourishing, and they're lovely communities, great people. That's where I choose to put my energy and spend my life these days.
Amazing. I know you sound like I don't like that word busy, but you sound like a very happily occupied person. And I think sometimes people feel like, what will I do? Like work gives me so much meaning, but there's so many ways in which one can contribute. And I think life has a way of taking you to those spaces that need your contribution. And when you're open and you've done the work, like you've cooperated with life, you're kind of, you know, you're proactive about things. You're not sitting on your
Yeah.
couch waiting for inspiration. What would you say to others considering fire?
Have a sit down and think, talk to a trusted friend or partner, and just say why you're thinking of doing it, what isn't working in your life, and what would you like to work. It's not an easy conversation because it feels very personal and feels like you could be evaluated or judged if you do that. But it feels like you might have a safe space to talk about these things. It really does bring some clarity into those conversations. And yeah, think about what you want, why you want it, where you would like to go. Do you want some kind of liberation from the things in your life, like a job that's not satisfactory? Do you want the freedom to travel when that becomes available again? Um, and then you can go into the detail of, well, what do I have? What do I need? And how do I get there? And Fire lays out that roadmap of how you can do all of those things in a really generous spirit. It really wants to support you. So it's not an unpleasant journey, but it can be. There's no guideline or safety rope necessarily. So it's good to have others around you just to say, you know, this is where you are, you're on track, you're okay. Are you ready?
I like those questions. Would you like more freedom? Would you like to be more liberated? Would you like to travel more? I went, yes, yes, yes. So I love my job. I'm in that business. I'm in that camp of I love what I do, and I've built in enough independence, that I would continue to do this even if, what would you say to those who are staunch advocates of passive investing? Because of I think the utilitarian approach is very prominent in FIRE, which is reduce your fees. I also hear financial advisors are evil, which we're not all evil. And, and because investments, ethical investments or sustainable investments come with a slightly higher fee because you need someone to pick stocks actively for you. So you might not be paying 0.1% in passive investments. You might be paying 0.7, 0.8% annually. What would you say to those who are
Well, passive investments are incredibly cheap to do, and you can do them yourself. And if that's the way you want to do it, yeah, it's a good choice to help you get towards FIRE. However, I would say it's not very ethical necessarily. And I've heard it said by people in the FIRE movement doing their own trainings and versions of, how to get to FIRE, trying to help other people, that if you buy, say, from the top 50 or 500 performing companies in the stock market, they're essentially working for you because you have shares in them, which might sound, hey, that's really good, but you look at what some of those companies are doing. Amazon's pushing a lot of small retailers out of business. They are the number one company in the world, but some of their practices aren't sustainable and ethical. Fossil fuel companies are up there. So while our state pension might be predicated on the best investments out there, our personal choices can be different. And that can change how societies work. So instead of living in unsustainable ways, we hear so much about climate change and how we're going to run out of food and water in the future. Making these personal individual choices rather than passive investments means we can change that narrative now. And I heard that something like half the money invested in the world is in pensions. So our futures really matter, and all of that money can shift that story and narrative and give us and the generations to come really safe, happy futures. It's green, renewable energies that are based, but beginning to be based at the moment, are taken off and are becoming very competitive against oil and gas, which is dropping. I think they're often called stranded assets, so they're not worth what they were even worth a couple of years ago. So if you do nothing, your investments can suddenly disappear and be yanked away from you. And having some choice over where they're managed and who's looking after them for you, you can avoid all of those pitfalls. And that's the way I choose to go. And I'm glad you're doing it as well.
Yeah. I think there are some themes in the world also that are doing very well. Speaking purely from a financial performance point of view of assets, passive versus ethical. So when you're invested in ethical, clean energy, which is doing very well, just global themes like we have a rising population and we have scarce resources, and there are companies that are focusing on technology to make, water more sustainable. They're attractive investments. You want to be in attractive investments, not loss-making stranded assets kind of investments. So I think there's also financial reason to look at sustainable investing. And there might be ways, I think, for the FIRE community to sort of combine passive and ESG. I'm more of a purist when it comes to sustainable investing. So for me, ESG is just a step in the right direction. But that may be the compromise that people look at, is if they want low fees, to look for something that at least eliminates some of the worst harmful impacts. And then what you mentioned about pension funds having a majority of the assets and how powerful they are, I just wanted to add that I read a statistic that said that investing ethically or investing sustainably is 27 times more powerful than not flying or becoming a vegan, you know? So money matters.
Yeah.
And so many people have work pensions and they don't know where the funds are. This has been so much fun, Andy. I'm so glad you agreed to this interview. And thank you. I really appreciate you doing this because uh, it's not easy talking about money and you're sharing it very openly. And I know it's coming from an intention of wanting more people to have this freedom and possibly even using FI for good. Is there anything else you'd like to say or like to add?
I think we've covered pretty much everything here, but I would say it's been very life-changing for me. Just looking at how everything was going, and some of it seemed almost random. I needed a job, so there was, something available, so I took that. And it's very kind of short-term views that weren't making me happy. And FI's given me the freedom to kind of plan for the future and look at what I want, and to be able to say no to the things that I don't want and yes to the meaningful, productive ways of living that might not give a return. And I'm happy, I'm getting a good income, my portfolio's growing, so it is possible. I've got a very simple London Irish working class background, and if I can do it, I think anyone can do it. So good luck on your journey.
Thank you so much, Andy. Oh, and can I ask you one last question? When did you actually file? I know you said Feb 2017 was when you started investing.
When did I, what, sorry?
When did you actually file? Go for it.
It was May 2019.
So very
and
quick.
Yeah, so pretty quick.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd give them a month's notice at work. That was my required notice period. And thought, no, I don't even want to give them that month because it's a life for me now. So I took a holiday, quit on the spot, and it's been a holiday ever since.
Yeah. Life can be a holiday. Life energy is precious.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate it. And I think this video will be very beneficial for other people who might be looking for this inspiration and be unhappy with some aspect of their life. And, thank you so much.
Yeah, I hope so. You're welcome.